All right, in this video, I'm going to go over how to properly set up your families and be able to independently control graphic overrides versus the 3D model object. So in this family, I have somebody built this previously, and I think there's a couple of problems with this family that we can fix to make it work a little bit better. So specifically, let's go into the here. We want to turn the trim on and off. So if we turn the trim on and off, all right, cool. It works in floor plan. We can turn it on and off, and it's not visible. That's cool. But if we go into, say, 3D, we can see that the trim is actually still turned off in 3D as well. So one of the things that we want to be able to have is we want to be able to have the trim visible in plan, trim visible in 3D, but turn the trim off in plan because we just don't want that graphic setting showing up. And so you can see one of the issues we have here is that this is basically turning off the 3D object itself. So let's try and go into the graphic overrides and see if we can turn that off in here. So if we go into the door category, we can see there's not a trim category here. So let's just turn these all off just to check. Click apply. Nothing's changed. Okay, so that means that this is not in the door category, this trim. So it must be hidden somewhere. So if we go into the family itself, look in here, and we click into here, we see, it's a generic model. And that's not a good thing to do. So when you have a nested object, especially if the nested object isn't shared, it's best to have it of the same category because that way the structure and the visibility overrides will be grouped together inside of the door category itself. So with here, it's actually nested under the generic models. So if we go into here, we can then go into the visibility graphic overrides. We can go into generic models. We can see, look, there's the trim. But here's the thing, it's already turned off. So why is it set up like that? Okay, so it's not turning off there. So if we go into 3D, we can go into generic models and go into trim. All right, so it's turning off the visibility for the 3D object, but it's not turning off the visibility for the 2D object, which means that the 3D object has a detail item or a filled region that is covering that area, and it's not linked to the object, which is a problem because you don't have the visibility override set to be able to override that in plan. So if we were to go into here, you can see that, yes, we have some detail items. This is a culprit. One of the problems with this is we have visibility parameters and on and off tied to it, and then we can also do only show if it's cut or uncut, which is fine, but we don't have a category override that we can assign to this, which is a problem of these 2D object types. So one of the things that I'd like to do is get rid of this. So we want to get rid of those, and we want to actually then, now that we're shown the actual 3D object, we want to make sure that the visibility is set to floor plan so that this object is showing in floor plan, and it'll show in cut because it's a nested object. And the settings that we have inherited from the nested object in there. All right, and we want to do the same thing to this side, turn the plan on. All right, and so then if we go into here and then reload that back into the project, you can see, oh, no, it's not there. And why isn't it there? So what that means, we need to then go back into the nested family itself, because the nested family itself is the one that's controlling that. Because this is also a generic model, we want to make sure that this is changed over to a door type. So we want to do this. All right, now it's a door category. The other thing that we need to set up is we need to set up the object style category for it. So we want to go into here and trim. Add that. So now we have a trim nested component because that's not a default inside of the door frame family. And so what we want to do is then take each of these objects and we want to make sure that they are assigned to a subcategory. Otherwise, they'll default to the door and we won't be able to control things independently. So now we have it set to the trim. We now then take this and we can now reload that back into the host family. And loading that back into the host family, we can see now that the what was the trim is now in the generic model is now in the door. And you can see that there's a threshold in here in this family, and the threshold also has the same issue, but that's a separate. It's the same principles here. So now if we load that back into the project, you can see that we have everything loaded, and it's loaded, but it's not showing up correctly. Why isn't it showing up correctly? So let's go into test here. Just see if we can turn the visibility on and off through the object styles here. So if we say trim, look at that. We got that working. Cool. So it's all working. Awesome. And the same thing in 3D. So if we do 3D, instead of just turning this on and off for the whole thing across all views, we can now just go to the visibility graphics, go to doors, go to trim, and all right, awesome. So the trim turns on and off. Cool. So let's go back into the here. So the culprit is in here. One of the things that we need to set up is we need to set up the visibility graphic overrides right here. So one of the things to take into account when you're doing these is because this is a surface-based family, so basically everything was oriented this way. So if everything was oriented vertically, things will be working a little bit differently. So if it was a surface based, then what we would do is go into floor plans, and then we go into the view range, and then we can actually set the cutting range for how things are supposed to be looking and what is going to be visible. So if this object is above the cutting plane, then it wouldn't be visible in the floor plan. We were hosting it and aligning. So this is what we would do if this was a wall hosted family, or if this was vertically oriented. But since this isn't, we wouldn't be doing it this way. So we would actually need to go into here and actually, instead of doing this in plan, so one of the things we have to take into account, because this is oriented this way, it'll be set vertically along the actual wall itself. So instead of doing a plan in here, and if we were to test this and say, all right, so that's not visible in plan and cut plane. So if we go back into here and load it back in, we can then see, all right, so it's loaded, and then we go back into the project. All right, cool. And we can see nothing has changed. And the reason that is because, again, it's oriented wrong. So what we need to do is change the orientation, because it's going to be flipped. So instead of what's going to be in the plan, it's going to be reoriented. So we would be seeing the right, the front, and left. So you'd still want to be able to have it seen in plan and cut plane. But now if we load that back in to the host family, all right, and then we reload that back into the project, and where we're existing, you see, look, everything is working properly. All right, so we don't have that object showing. We don't have basically the top of the casing showing up. That's awesome. One thing to take into account of when you are dealing with this is if you have these objects joined, both these objects will inherit the same view. Even if they are modeled separately, Revit will then assign the same visibility override. So you can see that is set to on, and this is also set to on, which is not what we had before. So if we unjoin those, you can see they are independently different. All right, there we go. So now, so since that's already loaded into here, we can see now, cool, everything is looking correctly. We don't have a detail item or a filled region that is showing up here. It's all controlled by the 3D model object. We can still turn everything on and off across the whole model here and keep those on. So what we want is to have those on. And now that we go to graphic overrides, we can then go to doors and we turn the trim off. Boom, there we go. Still have the trim visible in 3D. We still have it visible in elevation if we wanted, but we don't have them visible in the floor plan. This is awesome. This is how it should be when you are setting up families. You should not have them set up via detail items unless you have a very specific reason for it. And the user should not be able to guess. So the thing that you have to take account when you're making families, make sure they're the same category. So the user doesn't have to guess where they are inside of the object style so they control it. So if it's a generic model, they don't have to guess. 2, you want to make sure that you are not using detail items and when you are setting up your families. That way you can still control the visibility of the object itself. And 3, you have to pay attention to the orientation of the family itself and how it's going to be set up. So you need to take into account the visibility overrides for each of these. Those are the 3 main things you need to take into account when you're setting up families. I hope that helps you out and gives you some answers for why some of your families are not functioning the way that they're supposed to be. If you're in need of assistance to set up families, or if you need assistance in setting up your templates or managing projects, feel free to reach out to us at bimtemplate.com.